The Nevada desert had a way of testing people. Heat shimmered across the barren range, distorting the horizon into waves that looked like water, but never quenched thirst. Dust hung heavy in the air, carried by dry winds that seemed to scrape the skin. It was a place where only discipline held a person steady, where every weakness was magnified under the weight of the sun. The Navy SEAL chief stood with his arms crossed, boots planted firmly in the sand, surveying the line of shooters sprawled out with their rifles. Years of combat had hardened his judgment. He didn't waste attention on anyone who wasn't worth it. Most of the trainees were strong enough on paper. They could run miles, climb ropes, and drag their bodies through mud without complaint. But strength was a flimsy shield when it came to the Barrett .50 caliber rifle. That weapon had no patience for bravado. It was a beast that punished hesitation and mocked inexperience, its recoil like a hammer striking bone. Many soldiers thought they wanted to tame it until the first shot rattled through their chests, leaving their confidence scattered like brass on the ground. The chief's sharp eyes scanned the firing line, expecting to see the same predictable mistakes: fists clenched too tightly on the grip, shoulders braced wrong, breathing jagged with nerves. He had trained hundreds, maybe thousands of shooters, and the patterns rarely changed. Yet as his gaze moved down the line, it caught on one figure lying prone in the sand. A woman. Not the first he'd trained, not by a long shot, but something about her posture froze him in place. Where others twitched, she was still. Where others adjusted nervously, she remained anchored, her form neat and deliberate. The Barrett sat in front of her, not like an opponent she needed to wrestle, but like a tool she had already made peace with. Her cheek rested gently against the stock, eyes hidden behind the dark circle of her scope. The chief narrowed his eyes. He had seen seasoned men tremble when aligning their first shot with the Barrett. He had also seen plenty of rookies exaggerate calmness, their forced composure betraying insecurity. But this woman's stillness was different. It wasn't performance. It was possession. "Shooter ready," barked the range officer. The line responded with various signals, some crisp, others hesitant. The woman didn't move except to nudge her thumb against the safety. "Targets at 1200, the voice echoed over the heat. The Barrett roared. The chief instinctively tracked her lane. A heavy, metallic clang rang from the steel plate 1,200 meters downrange. Perfect strike. No hesitation. No flinch. Just a seamless, almost casual execution. Around her, several shooters missed entirely, their rounds tearing dirt into the air. A few struck wide, scattering against rocks. Heads turned down the line, whispers rising. The Barrett's recoil usually shoved shooters an inch off position, sometimes bruising shoulders or rattling arms. But she absorbed it with ease, shoulders firm, rifle steady. The dust that erupted from the muzzle brake faded, and she was already chambering another round. The chief's jaw tightened. He had expected competence. Every soldier here had earned the right to train, but this was something else. The second shot thundered. Another perfect ring at 1,500 meters. This time, the reaction was sharper. Some trainees muttered under their breath, disbelief bleeding into their voices. One man actually lifted his head from his rifle to stare, forgetting his own shot entirely. The woman remained indifferent, eyes fixed downrange, face expressionless. The chief leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees. He wasn't easily impressed, but this demanded closer scrutiny. 2 consecutive hits at that distance weren't accidents. They were the result of control, calculation, and discipline that most shooters took years to master. He studied her hands. They didn't tremble when she worked the bolt. Her breathing was so measured it looked rehearsed, each inhale shallow, each exhale disappearing like smoke. He shifted his gaze to her face, calm, almost detached. She wasn't here to prove anything to the others. That much was clear. She wasn't seeking approval. The chief recognized the look, the quiet, lethal focus of someone who had spent long hours behind a scope, not on a range, but somewhere real. Somewhere lives depended on the steadiness of her hands. Another round cracked through the silence. Another ring answered across the desert. By now, the line had split into two camps. Some trainees looked at her with open admiration, murmuring under their breath, as if they were watching a legend at work. Others stared with folded arms and clenched jaws, pride bruised by the effortless display. The chief had seen this before. Greatness always created divisions. But he ignored the chatter. His attention never left her. There was more to this woman than a sharp eye and steady grip. He could see it in the way she treated the Barrett, not as a weapon to conquer, but as a partner in dialogue. Each adjustment she made was deliberate, not flashy. She checked the wind with a single raised finger, glanced briefly at the mirage rising from the sand, then returned to the scope. It wasn't instinct. It was knowledge, drilled into muscle memory through hours of practice. The chief thought back on his years of deployments. He had served with snipers who could recite formulas for bullet drop, but froze under fire. He had also known quiet ones, men and women who never bragged, who carried their rifles like burdens instead of trophies. Those were the ones you trusted when the world went to hell. This woman looked exactly like that. When the range session ended, soldiers pulled their rifles aside, wiping sweat from their brows, shaking out sore shoulders. Most looked drained, but not her. She rose fluidly, slung the Barrett over one shoulder, and began cleaning it before anyone else even retrieved their gear. The chief's eyes followed her every move. Something stirred in him, a curiosity that years of hardened service rarely allowed. He needed to know more. He stayed silent at first, letting her work. Her motions were precise, methodical. She oiled the bolt carrier, checked the chamber, wiped dust from the muzzle. She did it all without wasted movement, as if the rifle was part of her daily rhythm. Finally, the chief stepped forward. "You shoot like you've done this before," he said flatly. Her eyes flicked up, steady, unwavering. "I've practiced," she replied simply. The chief arched an eyebrow. "Practice doesn't usually look like that." She didn't answer, just returned to her cleaning. That silence told him everything he needed to know. There was history here, something not written on her name tag or mentioned in the day's briefing. He recognized the restraint soldiers, who had seen too much often hid behind simplicity. They let their skill speak instead of their mouths. The chief watched her for another moment, then turned away, but not before one thought pressed heavy in his chest. This wasn't the last time she would surprise him. And deep down, he knew he had just witnessed the beginning of a story that would challenge everything. He thought he knew about the limits of a sniper, the discipline of a soldier, and the making of a legend. The line of shooters settled back into position, but the air had changed. Dust swirled lazily in the wind, hanging in the heat like a veil between sky and earth. The Nevada desert felt heavier now, as if the ground itself had absorbed the shock of what had just happened. Soldiers who had once been preoccupied with their own rifles now found themselves stealing glances at the woman lying prone with the Barrett .50. Breathing was unhurried. Calm in, calm out. The kind of rhythm born from discipline, not nerves. The chief stood with arms folded, his weathered face giving away a little, but his eyes never left her. He wanted to see if the first shot was a fluke, some alignment of luck and timing. Experience had taught him not to mistake coincidence for skill. "Targets at 1500, the range officer barked. The rifles fired almost in unison. The Barrett's thunder ripped through the desert again, rolling across the barren ground like distant artillery. The chief's gaze snapped to her lane. Clang. The steel plate 3,000 feet away rang with a haunting finality. She cycled the bolt without flinching, brass ejecting into the dust beside her. The recoil barely moved her shoulder. Her position remained perfect, as though the weapon weighed nothing. Around her, chaos bloomed. One recruit's round missed entirely, sending a geyser of sand into the air well short of the target. Another struck the dirt wide, ricocheting into nowhere. The rest scattered, their frustration hidden behind clenched jaws and tightened grips. But she simply reloaded. The chief narrowed his eyes. Every sniper had their ritual, a twitch of the fingers, a whispered count, some small habit before pulling the trigger. He looked for it, but there was nothing except an almost eerie stillness, as if she had silenced everything inside herself. Another roar. Another ring. 1,500 meters, confirmed. The chief heard the murmurs now. Impossible. No way she two in a row? He ignored the voices. He'd trained too many to let the opinions of the young cloud his judgment. But his jaw tightened. What he was witnessing didn't belong on a basic range in Nevada. This was the work of someone who had been sharpened under fire, where lives hung in the balance. She stayed flat, cheek pressed against the stock, as if the world around her had vanished. Mirage waves danced in the distance, bending light, but she adjusted with small, precise movements. No wasted energy. No hesitation. The chief leaned forward slightly, eyes narrowing. Most shooters overcompensated. They yanked the trigger instead of pressing it. They lost patience, firing before their breath aligned with the reticle. They second-guessed the wind, but she seemed to move with it, to anticipate rather than chase. It reminded him of something he had seen long ago, an old Marine sniper in Kandahar who had the same unshakable composure, the kind that unnerved enemies who never saw death coming. She chambered another round. The chief studied her hands. Smooth, no shake. They worked the bolt like she'd done it 1,000 times, the brass casing arcing in the sun before hitting the dirt with a dull thud. He followed her finger as it brushed the trigger, settling like it belonged there. 2,000 meters, the range officer called. The chief felt his chest tighten. 2,000 was a different game entirely. For many, it wasn't just distance, it was defeat. Mirage warped the target, wind shifted unpredictably, and bullet drop became monstrous. Most soldiers quit mentally before their shot even left the barrel. The Barrett cracked again. The silence stretched. It always did at that range, the seconds dragging out as the round carved through invisible resistance. Clang! The target sang like a bell, echoing across the valley. The chief's lips parted, though he caught himself before speaking. He forced his expression back into its hard mask, but inside something twisted. He had expected her to impress. He had not expected her to dominate. The murmurs grew louder now. Some recruits removed their eyes from their scopes, watching her as though hypnotized. Others shook their heads in disbelief, frustration painted on their faces. She's not even breaking a sweat. Who the hell is she? The chief silenced them with a look, though he understood their awe. He shared it, though he would never admit it aloud. Not yet. Her breathing remained steady, lips parting slightly with each exhale, her body sinking deeper into the earth, as if she belonged there. She adjusted her scope, nudged the bipod into place, and reset. There was no drama, no flourish, just rhythm. And in that rhythm, the chief recognized something dangerous. This wasn't training to her. This wasn't practice. This was muscle memory from survival. She had done this before, not on steel plates, but on men who never knew she was watching. The chief felt a chill run down his spine, despite the desert heat. He had to know her story. She fired again, the sound of the Barrett thundering through the desert like a heartbeat. Another target dropped. Another round hit true. By now, no one doubted her. The whispers had turned into stunned silence, broken only by the ringing of her impacts. The air around her seemed different, charged. She wasn't just shooting. She was commanding attention without speaking a word. The chief inhaled deeply, letting the dust sting his throat. His instincts told him what the paper file hadn't yet revealed. She wasn't here to learn how to shoot. She already knew. What he had to find out was why she was here at all. And as he stood there, the sun burning above, he realized one truth he couldn't shake. This woman wasn't merely good. She was extraordinary. And extraordinary always carried a story worth uncovering. When the session ended, the desert grew oddly quiet. The usual chatter of soldiers comparing scores was absent. Instead, the air hummed with unspoken questions. All eyes lingered on her as she shouldered the Barrett with effortless grace. The sun painted her in harsh gold, dust swirling around her boots as she walked toward the benches to clean her rifle. The SEAL chief followed at a distance, his gaze never leaving her. Decades of experience had honed his instincts. He had watched rookies crumble under pressure, seasoned warriors mask fear behind bravado, and rare prodigies rise in silence. She wasn't posturing. She wasn't even trying to impress. That made her more dangerous than anyone else on the line. He approached slowly, deliberately. She sat with the Barrett across her lap, a cleaning kit open, her hands moving with mechanical rhythm. The bolt came out, wiped clean. The bore brush slid smoothly down the barrel. Every step of her maintenance spoke of routine, not ritual. She wasn't thinking about the others still whispering behind her. She wasn't thinking about the chief standing a few feet away. She was focused entirely on the rifle. "You shoot like you've been doing this your whole life," the chief said finally, his voice low but edged with curiosity. Her hands didn't pause. She set the brush down, reached for a cloth, and began wiping the chamber. "Maybe I have," she replied evenly. "Practice doesn't usually look like that," he pressed. She glanced up at him, eyes calm, unreadable. "Practice looks like whatever you make of it." The chief studied her face. There was no arrogance, no smile tugging at the corners of her mouth, no defensive flinch, just quiet certainty. He had spent enough time around killers to know when someone carried ghosts. Her eyes carried them, not loudly, but like shadows in the corners. He sat on the bench opposite her, leaning forward, elbows on his knees. "Where'd you learn?" A shrug. "Deserts, mountains, places where the wind never stops moving. That narrows it down to half the world," he said dryly. She finally set the Barrett aside, meeting his gaze squarely. "My father believed in patience. He taught me to wait before I could walk, to sit still, to breathe with the world instead of against it." Shooting came later. The chief tilted his head, intrigued. "Your old man military?" She hesitated before nodding. "Army, tours in Iraq. He came back, but not whole. The war followed him home, teaching me to shoot. It kept his demons at bay for a while." There was weight in her tone, though she didn't let it linger. She picked up the bolt, ran a cloth over it, and reassembled the rifle in silence. The chief let the moment stretch, measuring her words. He had met plenty of children, molded by military fathers, some broken by the weight of expectation, others sharpened into blades. She was the latter. Still, something didn't add up. You didn't just practice your way into hitting steel at 2,000 meters without shaking. You didn't just inherit a calmness like hers. "You've been under fire," the chief said finally, not asking, but stating. She looked at him for a long moment, then lowered her eyes back to the rifle. "Everyone here has. Not like that." His tone hardened. "I've seen the way you breathe, the way you move after each shot. That's not range training. That's combat discipline. You've held your rifle with lives on the line. For the first time, A flicker crossed her face, so fast most wouldn't have noticed. But the chief did. He leaned back, letting the silence do its work. Soldiers always revealed themselves, more in what they didn't say than in what they did. Finally, she spoke. Afghanistan. A ridge overlooking a valley near Kunar. We had intel about an enemy convoy, and no time to move closer. I was asked to provide overwatch. Her voice was flat, but the chief heard the undercurrent. Afghanistan. He knew the terrain mountains that chewed men alive, winds that laughed at ballistics. A sniper's nightmare. What happened? He asked quietly. She wiped the last streak of oil from the receiver before answering. The convoy never made it. One man did, barely. The rest scattered. By the time they regrouped, it was over. The chief didn't press for numbers. He didn't need to. The way she spoke told him enough. She wasn't boasting. She was remembering. Her eyes lifted again, steady but distant, like she was still looking through the scope. You learn quickly when mistakes mean someone else doesn't come home. The chief felt something tighten in his chest. He had heard variations of that line from veterans across generations, but in her mouth, it wasn't cliché. It was truth. He sat back, exhaling through his nose. So why here? Why Nevada? Why now? She gave a faint, almost imperceptible smile. Because sometimes you go back to the basics. To remind yourself you can still breathe, still listen. The world moves fast. The trigger doesn't care about speed. The chief studied her for a long moment. He had read countless dossiers, each soldier reduced to dates, tours, commendations, and kills. Paper never captured the soul. Sitting here, he realized hers wasn't written down. Not yet. You've got more to teach these recruits than any manual, he said finally. Her brows lifted slightly. That's your way of saying I don't belong in the line? He shook his head. That's my way of saying you belong at the front of it. She looked down, silent for a beat, then began packing up her kit. The conversation was over, at least for now. But the chief wasn't done. Not by a long shot. As she walked away, Barrett slung across her back. He pulled out a small notebook from his pocket, a habit he'd carried since his earliest days. He jotted a single line, find her record, because he knew behind every quiet professional was a story buried deep, and hers was one he needed to dig out. And for the first time in years, the chief felt something he thought had left him long ago, curiosity. The desert heat still clung to him hours after the range had cleared. The chief sat in the dim cool of his office, blinds half drawn, shadows stretching across stacks of training reports, and half-drained mugs of black coffee. But his attention wasn't on the clutter. It was locked on a single file folder spread across his desk. Her name was printed neatly at the top. No embellishments. No hints that the papers inside might contain something extraordinary. He had learned long ago that the most unassuming files often hid the deepest truths. He flipped through the first pages, standard background checks, enlistment forms, medical clearances. Nothing unusual. Average height, lean build, fitness scores well above standard. Notes from instructors marked her as quiet, disciplined, reliable. All accurate, but all inadequate. They hadn't seen what he saw. His finger traced the ink across the pages until he found the section he'd been hunting for. Operational history. Afghanistan. Multiple deployments. Embedded with units requiring overwatch. The chief leaned closer, scanning line after line of terse summaries. Each mission boiled down into cold language, stripped of color, provided long-range support, assisted in suppression, neutralized targets. But one entry stopped him cold. Confirmed kill, 3,247 meters. He read it again, making sure his tired eyes hadn't deceived him. 3,247 meters. His pulse kicked once, hard. He sat back in his chair, the words burning into his mind. Few shooters in history had even attempted a shot that long, let alone confirmed a kill. Ballistics at that distance were a nightmare wine drift measured in feet, bullet drop measured in yards. Even the Earth's rotation had to be accounted for. 1 degree off, 1 fraction of a second miscalculated, and the shot would vanish into the dirt. But she had done it. The chief exhaled slowly, leaning back in his chair, memories from decades of combat washing over him. He remembered Canadian snipers in Iraq setting records, British marksmen in Helmand pulling off impossible shots. Those feats had been studied, debated, written into military lore. And now here, tucked inside a folder, was another name hers, quietly holding a mark that stood among the greatest. And she hadn't said a word. He leaned forward again, scanning the details of the report. Location: mountain ridge overlooking a valley. Enemy movement detected. Estimated range: 3,247 meters. Single shot confirmed. Save the unit from ambush. No embellishment. No ceremony. Just fact. The chief's jaw tightened. He thought back to the way she had handled the Barrett earlier, her body steady, her face unreadable. At the time, he'd wondered if she had seen combat. Now he knew. She had not only seen it, she had shaped it. He turned the page, but the record said little else. The military had a habit of reducing human feats into sterile bullet points, as if words could contain what it meant to stare through a scope for seconds that felt like hours. Finger poised on a trigger that could alter the course of lives. He rubbed a hand across his face. He wanted to ask her why she hadn't told anyone. Most soldiers with a record like that would wear it like a badge, bragging in bars, using it as leverage. But she hadn't even hinted at it. She had let her skill speak for itself, never mentioning that one of her shots belonged to history. He respected that, maybe even admired it. But it also unsettled him, because silence could mean humility, or it could mean burden. The chief stood, pacing the room, the folder still open on the desk. He thought about the younger recruits, whispering about her on the range. If they knew the truth, awe would turn to obsession. Rumors would spread, egos would bruise, and envy would fester. Greatness was rarely celebrated without consequence. He had seen too many prodigies crushed under the weight of expectations they never asked for. He paused at the window, looking out at the desert night. The horizon glowed faintly orange from the setting sun, the mountains jagged against the fading sky. He wondered if she had taken her record shot under a sky like this, waiting for the wind to settle, her breathing sensed with the earth. He pictured her finger tightening on the trigger, the long silence as the bullet cut through air, then the faint sound of impact 3 kilometers away. He shook his head. Extraordinary didn't begin to cover it. Returning to the desk, he flipped through more pages, piecing together fragments of her service. Each note reinforced the same truth: calm under pressure, unflinching, precise. But the reports lacked soul. They didn't capture the way she'd moved earlier that day, how she had treated the Barrett not as a weapon to master, but as a partner in rhythm. He closed the folder slowly, the sound echoing in the quiet office. The chief knew one thing now. She wasn't just another soldier passing through his training program. She was something far rarer, a living piece of military history walking quietly among them. He sat back down, fingers drumming lightly on the desk. He should let it go. Let her keep her silence. Let her record remain, just another line in the archives. But curiosity gnawed at him. Why hadn't she spoken of it? Why carry such a record in silence? And what did it cost her to make that shot? The chief reached for his notebook again, scribbling another line beneath his earlier note. Ask her about the valley. But as he closed the book, he felt a strange hesitation. He had interrogated prisoners, grilled recruits, challenged officers. But something about questioning her felt different. It wasn't about uncovering facts. It was about uncovering truth. And truth was often heavier than even the Barrett's recoil. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. For the first time in a long while, he felt something stirring in his chest, not just curiosity, but awe. A reminder that no matter how many years he had served, the world still held surprises. And as he thought of her steady eyes and calm breath on the range, the chief realized he wasn't just training a soldier. He was witnessing a legend who had chosen silence over glory. And he intended to find out why the training range was quiet at dawn. Dust still clung to the air from the night winds, and the sky was painted in soft bands of orange and purple. The chief stood at the edge of the gravel, arms folded, watching her assemble the Barrett with her usual precision. She didn't rush. Every movement was deliberate, as if ritual mattered more than speed. He waited until she settled into her prone position, cheek against the stock, eyes narrowing through the scope. The rifle seemed less like a weapon in her hands and more like an extension of her. "Coffee's better in the office," he said finally. She lowered the rifle, glanced back at him, and gave the faintest smile. "I'll take your word for it. Come on," he said, tilting his head toward the barracks. "We need to talk." Inside the office, the air was cooler. The chief set 2 mugs on the desk, sliding one toward her. She sat across from him, posture straight, eyes calm. No trace of nerves, no curiosity about why she'd been called in. She was too used to the weight of authority to be unsettled by it. He tapped the closed folder in front of him. "I read your record." Her eyes flicked to the folder, then back to him. Still no change in expression. Most of it's routine. Good soldier. Better than good, actually. Reliable. Precise. But one line stood out. He leaned forward, his voice lower. 3,247 meters. Confirmed kill. For the first time, something shifted in her gaze. Not pride. Not surprise. More like a shadow moving across her eyes. Fleeting, but heavy. "You never mentioned it," he said. She took a slow sip of coffee, setting the mug down carefully before answering. "Because it's not a story I like to tell." "That's exactly why I need to hear it," the chief replied. His tone was firm, but not unkind. He wasn't looking for gossip. He was looking for understanding. She leaned back slightly, her fingers tracing the rim of the mug. For a moment, silence stretched between them. The hum of the air conditioner filled the room, steady and indifferent. Finally, she spoke. It was Helmand Province. High ridges, long valleys. We'd been tracking a unit moving toward a village, about 50 fighters. Intel said they were loaded with explosives, planning to hit a market. My team was small, too far out for air support, and we couldn't risk them reaching civilians. Her voice was even, but her eyes drifted slightly, as if replaying the landscape in her mind. We set up on a ridge. The only chance we had was to stop their lead element before they reached the valley. The problem was distance. Over 3 kilometers. Even the spotter thought it was insane. The chief didn't interrupt. He let her words settle, painting the scene in his mind, the jagged ridges, the hot Afghan sun, the weight of waiting. I dialed in everything: wind, humidity, even Coriolis. But at that distance, it wasn't just calculation. It was instinct. I'd practiced for years, but you never really believe until the moment you squeeze the trigger. Her fingers tightened slightly on the mug. I remember the silence after I fired. The bullet took almost 10 seconds to reach. 10 seconds where the world held its breath. Her voice dropped lower. And then he fell. Just one man, but the column stopped. They froze, scattered, and our team managed to push them back. The village was safe. The record says one confirmed kill. What it doesn't say is that it saved hundreds of lives. The chief studied her face. There was no boast in her words, only memory and something heavier. You did what had to be done, he said quietly. She nodded once. Yes, but people don't talk about what comes after. That distance, it gives you time. Too much time. You don't just pull the trigger and see the result. You wait for it. You feel the seconds pass, knowing what's coming, unable to take it back. When the round hit, part of me hit with it. The chief let the silence breathe, understanding in his own way. Every shot taken in war carried weight, but few knew what it meant to stretch it across miles of sky. So why keep it quiet? He asked finally. Why let a record like that sit in a folder instead of in the open? Her eyes locked on his, steady no. Because it doesn't belong to me. It belongs to the men and women who survived because of it. And because if people hear about it, they stop seeing me. They only see the shot. I'm not a legend. I'm a soldier. That's all I ever wanted to be. The chief nodded slowly, absorbing her words. He realized then that her silence wasn't shame. It was discipline. It was respect for the lives entwined with that one bullet's path. He leaned back, exhaling. You know, most people would wear that story like a medal. I'm not most people, she said simply. For a long while, they sat in quiet. Outside, the wind shifted the blinds, thin lines of sunlight cutting across the desk. The folder between them seemed almost insignificant now, just paper trying to contain something far greater. Finally, the chief closed it and slid it aside. Fair enough, he said. But you should know this silence doesn't erase truth. The men you saved, the lives you protected, they carry your story whether you tell it or not. She gave a faint smile. Then let it stay with them. The chief studied her one last time, then stood. Training resumes at 0900. Don't be late. Yes, Chief. As she rose and left the office, the chief lingered behind. He poured himself another coffee, staring at the empty doorway. He'd gotten his answer. Not the one he expected, but perhaps the only one that mattered. He realized then that he had misjudged her. She wasn't a soldier chasing glory. She wasn't even a record holder looking for acknowledgement. She was something rarer. A protector who carried her legend in silence. And in that silence, he heard something louder than any boast could ever be. The base was never truly quiet. Even at night, generators hummed, boots struck gravel in steady patrol rhythms, and the low rumble of transport trucks bled into the air. But for days after his conversation with her, the chief noticed a different kind of sound-hushed voices, pauses in chatter, eyes that lingered too long. Word was spreading. Not the full truth, not yet, but enough. Recruits who had seen her shoot whispered to others. Some swore she could split a playing card at a mile. Others claimed she had trained with shadow units no one could name. Myths bloomed in the absence of facts. The chief kept his eyes open, his ears sharper than usual. He knew how quickly whispers could harden into stories, and stories into legends. And legends, once loose, couldn't be pulled back into silence. He found her in the armory late one evening, wiping down the Barrett with a cloth, her focus absolute. It wasn't the first time he'd seen her there alone, but tonight there was a weight about her. The way her shoulders hunched slightly, the way she avoided looking toward the doorway, as if she already sensed his presence. You've heard them, haven't you? She asked. She didn't glance up. Hard not to. He stepped closer, folding his arms. It'll get worse. The more silent you are, the louder they'll get. She set the rifle aside, finally meeting his gaze. Her eyes were steady, but he saw the tension beneath. Let them talk. They don't know the truth. That doesn't matter, the chief said. Perception becomes truth out here. You know that as well as I do. She tilted her head, studying him for a moment. And what do you think I should do? Stand on a table in the mess hall and announce it? Give them the story they're looking for? No, he said firmly. That's the last thing you should do. But I need you to understand something. Silence isn't a shield forever. It draws as much attention as speaking does. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then she sighed, sitting back on the bench. I didn't join the military to become a story chief. I joined to do my job. To protect people. That's it. He respected that more than she knew. But he also knew reality rarely respected the wishes of soldiers. Heroes were made, not chosen. The next day, the tension grew sharper. During a live fire drill, one of the younger recruits, a cocky kid from Texas, asked her point blank, loud enough for others to hear. Hey, Sarge, rumor is you've made shots farther than anybody alive. That true? The range fell quiet. Even the instructors seemed to pause, curious. She adjusted her scope, calm as ever. Rumors are dangerous things. Focus on your own shooting. The recruit chuckled, but the question had landed. The silence afterward spoke louder than his laugh. The chief stepped in quickly, barking orders to reset targets, breaking the tension before it hardened. But inside, he knew the storm was coming. That evening, he called her back into his office. She entered quietly, posture crisp, waiting. You handled it well today, he said. I said nothing, she replied simply. Sometimes saying nothing is harder than giving an answer. She gave the faintest smile. Then maybe I'm good at hard things. The chief leaned forward, his voice lower. You need to be ready. The more you deflect, the more determined they'll become. Curiosity is a fire. It doesn't die easy. Her smile faded. And what if it burns me down? Then I'll be there to make sure it doesn't, he said without hesitation. For the first time, she looked surprised, maybe even grateful. Over the next week, the chief kept a closer eye on her. He watched the way other recruits glanced at her in the mess hall, the way conversations hushed when she walked past. She carried herself with the same calm, but he noticed small cracks. A longer pause before answering questions. A slight stiffness in her movements. The silence was wearing on her. One night, while walking the perimeter, he found her sitting on a crate near the fence line, staring out at the desert. The Barrett rested beside her, its long barrel gleaming faintly under the moonlight. Couldn't sleep? He asked. Never do, before training days. He stood beside her, hands resting on his belt. For a while, they said nothing. The desert stretched endlessly before them, wind whispering across the sand. Finally, she spoke. You ever regret the stories that follow you, Chief? He glanced at her. All the time. The problem is, they stop being your stories once they're out there. They belong to everyone else. You just live with them. She nodded slowly, as if the answer confirmed something she already knew. Then maybe silence is the only way to keep a piece of yourself. Maybe, he said. But it comes with a cost. She turned to him, eyes sharp in the moonlight. I can carry it. He believed her. But he also knew no soldier carried weight forever without bending. In the days that followed, he wrestled with a choice. He could protect her secret, keep the record buried in files where few would ever find it. Or he could prepare her for the inevitable, that truth had a way of surfacing, no matter how deep it was buried. By the end of the week, he made his decision. During the next drill, he called the team together. The recruits gathered, murmuring among themselves, anticipation buzzing in the air. The chief stood in front of them, eyes scanning the faces. You want to know the truth about legends? He said, they don't matter here. Not in this program. Not in combat. What matters is discipline, skill, and trust. The moment you get caught up chasing someone else's shadow, you lose your edge. His gaze lingered on her briefly before moving on. So drop the whispers. Drop the stories. Focus on your own rifles. Understood? A chorus of "Yes, Chief," echoed back. The tension loosened slightly, though curiosity still lingered in their eyes. Afterward, she approached him quietly. "Thank you." He shook his head. "Don't thank me. I just bought you time. How you use it, that's up to you." She gave a slow nod, understanding. As she walked away, the chief watched her with a mix of respect and worry. He knew the storm hadn't passed. He had only held it back. But he also knew something else. Legends didn't stay buried. Not forever. And when hers surfaced, as it inevitably would, he needed to make sure she was ready. The desert sun rose sharp and unrelenting, scattering long shadows across the gravel and sand. The base was alive with activity. Trucks rolling to the far edges, instructors barking commands, and recruits moving with the precision of drills rehearsed 1,000 times. Yet amidst the noise, an undercurrent of tension hummed, subtle but undeniable. Whispers had become a quiet storm. The chief noticed it immediately. Heads turned when she passed. Eyes lingered longer than necessary. Even the instructors, normally stoic and focused, stole glances. The rumors were spreading. It had started small, a whispered question in the mess hall about the impossible shot. Then a hushed debate in the armory. A scribbled note passed among recruits, quickly folded and concealed. By midweek, the desert air was thick with the electric curiosity of those who sensed greatness but didn't yet understand it. He found her during a live fire drill. She lay prone behind the Barrett, adjusting her scope with methodical calm, completely focused. The other shooters fired in staccato bursts, missing or hitting slightly wide, their tension obvious in every twitch and flinch. But she was different. Every round sang true. Each shot precise, clean, controlled. And the moment each round struck the steel downrange, a faint murmur ran through the line. Even veterans leaned in, half in disbelief, half in admiration. The chief watched her hands, steady as ever. He had witnessed the record before, but now he also noticed the reactions it triggered. Curiosity, envy, sometimes all at once. He knew the moment was delicate. One misstep, one word from the wrong recruit, and the myth surrounding her could spiral out of control. After the drill, the recruits clustered near the benches, speaking in low tones, trying not to be overheard. The chief approached her quietly. "They're talking," he said softly. She didn't seem surprised. "I can hear it. They'll want to know the details. The record, the distance. They'll ask questions you might not want to answer." Her hands rested on the barrel, fingers tracing the metal. "Let them ask. I'll decide what I answer." He nodded, but inside, he knew curiosity could be relentless. Legends had a way of growing beyond their control. By midday, the whispers had reached the instructors. One, a grizzled veteran of countless deployments, finally broke the silence. "Is it true?" he asked, not masking the awe in his voice. 3,247 meters? The recruits held their breath. She didn't flinch. "Yes," she said simply. Silence fell. Not disbelief, not shock, just acknowledgement. The weight of the number settled over the group. They could picture the impossibility of the feat, the distance, the wind, the terrain. Few had ever even attempted such a shot, let alone confirmed it. "Let me see it again," the veteran said finally, walking toward her line. "Show me how you even. Manage that." She lowered the rifle, standing gracefully. "It's not about showing off," she said. "It's about understanding the environment. Everything has a voice, the wind, the heat, the trajectory. You just listen. The chief observed her, noting the patience in her explanation, the calm authority in her posture. Even when faced with astonishment, she didn't waver. This was the mark of a true leader. She had faced death and distance, yet she spoke with measured clarity, not ego. By afternoon, the murmurs had grown into quiet discussion circles. Recruits tried to compare their own abilities to hers, some frustrated, others inspired. Some instructors whispered to one another, debating whether she belonged in training exercises or operational leadership. The chief called her aside privately. "They're going to keep talking," he warned. "I know," she said, not flinching. "Let them. I didn't do it for applause." "Still," he said, lowering his voice, "you need to be aware. Even silence draws attention. Some will respect it, others not so much." She met his gaze, steady and unwavering. "I can handle it." He wanted to believe her. He hoped she could. But he had seen too many legends crumble under curiosity's weight. He kept his hand near the folder in his office, ready to intervene if necessary, ready to control the narrative before it became a distraction. The following morning brought unexpected attention. The base received a message from headquarters. An internal newsletter had noted a record-breaking long-range shot by an unknown sniper. Suddenly, the whispers weren't just internal. They were being documented, recorded, likely to travel far beyond the desert. The chief felt a weight settle in his chest. This was the moment he had anticipated, but hoped to delay. Once the story spread, no amount of discretion could contain it. He found her in the armory, polishing the Barrett. "They know," he said simply. She looked up, expression calm. "Then we deal with it," she replied. Her composure was remarkable. Yet the chief sensed the tension beneath the surface, the kind that came from knowing your every action could be dissected, judged, or mythologized. He remembered the long hours she had spent training, the way she had spoken about her Afghanistan mission, the solitary burden of carrying a record that few could comprehend. "They'll want interviews, explanations, maybe even demonstrations," he said. "I'll answer what needs answering," she said. "The rest, they don't need to know." "Good," he said, though inside he was still wary. He had trained soldiers who crumbled under fame, who let attention distract them, and he had no intention of letting that happen to her. Over the next few days, the base became a study in tension and reverence. Recruits hung on her every movement, taking notes, practicing longer, harder, with renewed focus. Instructors observed quietly, some clearly impressed, others subtly challenged by her presence. The desert had shifted, even if subtly. She had changed the atmosphere, simply by existing, simply by being a master of her craft. The chief watched all of it. He realized that this wasn't just about her record anymore. It was about influence, the kind that came quietly, without words, without forcing attention. She was reshaping the base's culture, one precise shot at a time. That evening, he found her sitting alone at the edge of the range, legs stretched out, the Barrett beside her. She gazed toward the horizon, the sun dipping behind distant mountains. "You're handling it well," he said. She shook her head slightly. "I'm just staying focused." He understood that. Focus was everything. But he also knew that focus alone wouldn't shield her from curiosity, envy, or the inevitable stories that would grow beyond her control. Legends had a way of escaping even the most disciplined hands. "You've got their attention now," he said softly. "Use it wisely." She turned to him, eyes calm but thoughtful. "I always do." The chief nodded, letting the words linger. He had no doubt she could manage it. But he also knew that once the legend fully spread, her life would never be the same. And sometimes, being prepared for attention was as important as preparing for combat. The sun disappeared behind the mountains, and the desert fell into quiet. The wind whispered across the sand, carrying with it hints of a story that had only just begun. And for the first time, the chief realized the truth. Legends were never silent for long. The desert morning was crisp, a rare chill cutting through the heat that usually dominated the Nevada range. The horizon glowed pale gold, reflecting off the sand and the metallic glint of rifles lined neatly on the benches. Today felt different. Even before she arrived, whispers moved through the recruits like wind through dry brush. They had heard the stories. They had seen her skill. Now, the weight of both rested heavily on everyone present. The SEAL chief arrived early, as always, standing near the firing line. He watched her approach, Barrett slung casually across her shoulder. There was no hurry, no rush. Every step was measured, every movement deliberate. Already, he felt the quiet gravity she carried, how it changed the rhythm of the day before a single shot was fired. The recruits gathered, eager but respectful. Some tried to appear casual, but the tension in their shoulders betrayed them. Today, the stories were no longer whispers, they were expectation. Everyone wanted to see her skill. Everyone wanted to measure themselves against it. The chief approached her quietly. "Ready?" She gave a faint nod. Always. He had watched her over weeks now. He knew her precision, her patience, her restraint. And he knew what made her remarkable wasn't just her marksmanship. It was the quiet authority she carried, the confidence born not from ego, but from experience and discipline. She had faced death, made impossible calculations, held her fingers steady, and carried the consequences. That was rare. That was extraordinary. The chief signaled to the recruits, who took their positions, rifles in hand. Targets were set at extreme ranges, much farther than usual. He knew she could handle them. What he didn't know was whether the others were prepared to witness the impossible. She lay prone behind the Barrett, adjusting the scope with her usual methodical calm. Around her, the desert seemed to settle into quiet reverence. Even the wind, usually harsh and capricious, felt subdued, almost attentive. The first round fired. The recoil barely moved her shoulder. The bullet struck true. A perfect ring, crisp and final. A murmur spread among the recruits. The second round followed, then the third. Each shot was as precise as the first, seemingly effortless. Her skill was undeniable. Every trainee and instructor present recognized the truth. This was mastery in motion, a performance of years honed in silence and discipline. The chief leaned against the bench, letting the scene unfold. He could feel the awe in the room. The young shooter's eyes widened, jaws tightened in disbelief. Some couldn't help but glance at their own rifles, wondering if they could ever match her control, her focus, her calm. And yet, she didn't seem to notice. She was entirely absorbed in her work, the rhythm of loading, aiming, breathing, and firing. She was a conduit for her own precision, not a performer seeking applause. After the drill, the recruits gathered around her. Some whispered questions, tentative, almost reverent. How do you do it? Her gaze swept over them. Calm, steady. Listen, observe, adjust. Wait. The shot isn't about the rifle. It's about understanding everything around you. The chief watched her, noting the authority in her words. Even those who were skeptical were drawn to her calm certainty. She was more than a shooter. She was a teacher, a standard bearer, a living lesson in discipline and restraint. Later, the chief pulled her aside. "You've changed things here," he said quietly. She shrugged. "I just do my job." "No," he said firmly. "It's more than that. You've made them see what's possible. You've reminded them what it means to master skill, to carry responsibility. That doesn't happen by shooting alone. That happens by example. by patience, by discipline. And you've done it without arrogance, without bragging. That's rare. That's powerful. She gave a small smile. I never wanted power, just focus. And yet, he said softly, you've given them something stronger than power, perspective, respect, inspiration. He watched as she collected the Barrett, slinging it over her shoulder. The room was silent but alive, the recruits and instructors watching, not with envy, but with quiet reverence. She didn't demand attention. She didn't need it. But in her presence, greatness was impossible to ignore. That evening, the chief sat alone in his office, the desert fading into twilight outside the window. He reflected on the weeks he had observed her, the moments of quiet mastery, the impossible distances she had conquered, and the record that had remained unspoken until necessity drew it out. He thought about her silence, about the weight of her Afghanistan mission, about the 3,247-meter shot that had saved lives and marked her among the greatest. He realized that her story wasn't about numbers or distance or records. It was about discipline, focus, restraint, and the quiet strength to carry what others could not. He knew one thing with certainty. The world would hear of her sooner or later. Stories had a way of traveling, spreading from soldier to soldier, base to base. And when they did, the legend would grow, as it always did. But he also knew this. She would handle it. Not with arrogance, not with ego, but with the same calm certainty she had demonstrated on the range, in the field, and in life. She would continue to do her job. She would continue to teach, to inspire, to lead, not because she sought recognition, but because she understood the value of restraint and responsibility. The chief leaned back in his chair, letting the moment settle. He realized that what he had witnessed was rare, extraordinary, and enduring. She wasn't just a sniper, a soldier, or a record holder. She was a reminder of what discipline and mastery could achieve, quietly, without fanfare. And in the quiet of the office, he allowed himself a rare smile. Legends didn't need to shout. Some simply lived, acted, and left their mark on steel, on sand, and on the people who watched them with awe. Outside, the desert stretched endlessly, indifferent to the stories of men and women who passed through it. But within its folds, she had already carved her place. And those who had seen her knew one thing. The world would remember her, whether she wanted it to or not. And for the chief, that was enough. The rifle lay across the table, polished and ready, a tool in capable hands. And in those hands, it was more than a weapon. It was precision, patience, and history. And she? She walked out into the desert night, calm, steady, carrying nothing more than her discipline, and leaving awe in her wake. The recruits would speak of her in whispers and speculation. Instructors would compare notes and shake their heads in disbelief. But the chief knew the truth, and that was all that mattered. Sometimes greatness didn't need an audience. Sometimes it just needed a witness. And he had been that witness.